biggest of which 250 million years ago. You can see that drop. It's really quite incredible. It's the greatest mass extinction of all time. And we're going to take you to the last mass extinction, that one over there on the right, the last sort of tooth there, or sawtooth. That's the end of the time of the dinosaurs, the end Cretaceous extinction. When you think about extinctions, this little diagram, I like this one to sort of help you sort of conceptualize what happens. So you've got a branching tree of life, and that could be lifestyles, the way the organisms engage with their environment. It could be just their diversity, who they are, sort of the taxonomic organization. Then you have that red line, which is our extinction event. There's lots of different causes of these extinctions. Everyone is unique, what caused them. And that sort of trims the tree. And then there's parts of that tree that make it through. And then that blue zone is a really interesting period of time where there's just a few survivors, and they repopulate the planet. And yet, in these 5 mass extinctions, that's always a period of time that's sort of shrouded in mystery. There's very few fossils. You're looking for things that are very specifically timed. You want to see it right after the extinction. And so often we don't have good data for those periods of time. And yet, they're sort of the moments, the origins of the time afterwards. So in the case of our most recent mass extinction, when you look outside and you look at the life on the planet today, we've got this remarkable diversity, right? We've got the lizards and the mammals, by looking at that tiger, the birds, the fish, the insects, the plants, and the list goes on. Everything, including us, were shaped by the last great mass extinction in Earth's history, right? We would not be sitting here having this talk, the reception tonight, were that mass extinction not to have happened. So we are shaped by the extinctions that come before us. And so there are these tragic moments of great loss, but there are also a moment of innovation and growth into the period afterwards. So let me take you back to the last great mass extinction, the end Cretaceous extinction here on Earth. 66 million years ago, on some random Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, who knows, we were hit by a giant chunk of metal and rock. And that thing was about 10 miles across, was moving at about 150,000 miles an hour. It came in from the south, we know. It came across first Antarctica, South America, and it slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula, and it liquefied the surface of the Earth. It pulled outer space to the tops of the trees, and it was like dropping a stone in water, and there was a central core that was taller than Mount Everest for 5 minutes before itself collapsing. And it left a crater about 120 miles across and sent a shockwave and firestorm across North America. So here's the site of Colorado, some 66 million years ago, 3 minutes after impact. And these two iconic dinosaurs are T-Rex and our Triceratops. I always find this funny, and this, of course, was done by National Geographic of all things. They seem more occupied with each other than the firestorm coming at them. But it really does show this moment, this cataclysmic moment. We think that the firestorm and shockwave made it from Mexico to Alaska in 5 minutes. The material that blew out of the crater rained back to Earth and almost essentially turned the atmosphere into about the temperature it would take to bake cookies in your oven for about an hour. So about 350 degrees Fahrenheit, just the world over. So it's pretty hard to escape from something like that. And a whole myriad of other environmental sort of events caused these dinosaurs and many other things to go extinct. And funnily enough, there were other bad things happening at the same time. So India over there on the right-hand side was rocketing northward from a plate tectonic perspective, rocketing, so about 10 centimeters a year, into Asia. And it created the Himalayas that we have today. But at this moment, there were great volcanic eruptions occurring about 1 million years before the extinction, and they continued afterwards. So we think the ecosystem was sort of stressed the world over. Probably looked kind of like the smoke here in Colorado, the sort of apocalyptic smoke, but for maybe a couple million years, and we got this punch, this 1-2 punch of the asteroid during that. So you can see the asteroid impact up there, KPG meteorite impact crater. So here's just what those lava flows look like. This is the Western Ghats in India. So they're big canyons eroded into these ancient lava flows, and and the red area shows you the extent of the lava today. But these things, again, really changed, we think, the environment, and then the asteroid hit during that time. And then those two things, again, conspired to kill the dinosaurs. And we love, Tyler and I love this iconic image of our friend Triceratops, just rotting into the dirt there. And our ancestors, those little critters there, crawling all over that dinosaur, those that were to inherit the earth. So here's a nice diagram from actually Tyler's backyard. He grew up in the very rural part of North Dakota. He grew up in one of the best dinosaur hunting grounds in the world. At about 6, he was already finding dinosaurs. And this is from a TV show that he was in. But it really shows this great thing here where all the rocks on the bottom are filled with dinosaurs. It's the dinosaur time. And that line right there near the top marks the asteroid impact. And it's marked by a whole bunch of different features. And above it is the time sort of afterward, in that moment of where we would like to make a discovery to sort of understand what happened afterwards. But it turns out there's actually these rocks here in our backyard too. So this is a geologic map showing the Denver Basin in eastern Colorado, and the sites of course, Denver and Colorado Springs. And those colored rocks there are a bunch of sediment that came off the Rocky Mountains over a period of about 4 million years, right at the perfect time to capture the end of the dinosaurs and the beginning of the time afterwards. If we cut that in half, you can kind of see what it looks like. So this is just a nice little line drawing showing you cut through the Front Range and I think the Gore Range behind it, and just gives you a sense of the geology under the surface. And that big green unit, that's the Pierre Shale, which is what we frack for lots of oil and gas. And the chunk at the top, that sort of brown and tan stuff, is the material that was being shed off the Rockies at the end of the Cretaceous. And we spent actually a couple of decades really trying to understand these rocks at the Denver Museum. And there's a couple of cored wells, continuously cored wells in the basin, where you plunge a hole down several thousand feet, pull up the rocks to read what is below your feet. And we can take also advantage of an unbelievable number of oil and gas and water wells. So here's that same map with just the water wells that we've sort of digitized to put into a model to understand the subsurface of the basin, to understand the rocks as they outcrop. So this is our 3D geologic model, the different colors suggesting different rock types and all the sort of plunged wells through that. And we can use that to really precisely tell what age rocks hit the surface along the Front Range, and what then you can go and look and see what fossils they might hold. And we can overlay this on Google Earth. So here's a neighborhood in Colorado Springs, northern Colorado Springs, with fossil sites throughout the city. We find amazing fossils in the creek beds. And these different boundaries here mark, again, the ages of the rocks. But that red dashed one is actually the KT boundary, that boundary that marks the extinction of the dinosaurs. And we've modeled it so well, we can go to like your backyard and see if the KT boundary runs underneath your lawn in the back of your house. And so here's the green sites are all Cretaceous fossil plant sites in this case. The KT boundary, that straight line, and then the first sort of tan one is the time afterwards. And so it's really remarkable. The model guides us through the basin to look for fossils of appropriate age. So we're going to just sort of look at this geologic map for a moment here, but this is the pad of rocks now sort of zoomed in. And if we look at a couple of key cities here, we've got Denver up north, Castle Rock, and Colorado Springs to just sort of help orient you. And then that line, that tan line, is the KT boundary. So the rocks on the outside of that line are all Cretaceous. Dinosaurs are in those rocks. And the rocks on the inside are the time afterwards. It's like a stack of pancakes. You're looking at it in plan view, but the ones in the middle are a little higher and the ones down below are a little lower. So that KT boundary, of course, is significant in this story of how life changed at the end of the Cretaceous. Actually, in the Denver Basin, we have the best examples of this boundary anywhere in the world. So the boundary itself is, this is our colleague Rich Barkley from the Smithsonian. He's got his finger on the actual fallout from the asteroid. And these dates here are from volcanic ashes. So volcanoes were blowing up at the same time, not because of the asteroid, but just because it was volcanic at that time. and they're dropping into coal beds or old swamps, and we can date those layers, those white layers, very precisely. And so this work has helped us understand that the asteroid hit 66.021 million years ago. So 66,021,000 years ago is when the asteroid hit. So we went from this remarkable world of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs occupied this planet far longer than the time since the dinosaurs. And here's just two really cool animals called Anzu wiley. This is actually a dinosaur that Tyler helped to name. And this is the world in which they lived, an incredibly diverse flora and forest, teeming with all kinds of fascinating life. And of course, these great dinosaurs, ostrich-like dinosaurs here called Anzu. So here we are 66 million years ago, the asteroid hits, and here's our world after. Quite depauperate of diversity, and this is the recovery, maybe a few hundred years to a few thousand years after the impact here in Colorado with just sort of low-growing vegetation, ferns. There's actually a crocodile on that little spit of land there in the middle. So Tyler and I really sort of set out to shed some light on this. We both have studied the time before, leading up to the extinction, but really thought we could say something about the time after. And it was, in truth, it was a little bit naive. So many scientists have thought they would do this. And we thought also, if we were to be successful, we would have to go to Bolivia or Siberia or somewhere in Africa to make a discovery that really had some interesting information to add to this. But the first thing you need to do is go to your backyard. So we've got the right age rocks. Even though people have been looking for a long time, we understood the age of those rocks. And we were able to go to a place down outside of Colorado Springs that has the right age rocks to study this really interesting and unusual interval of time after the last great mass extinction, where there should be tons of sort of diversification and things happening. And yet, it was sort of shrouded in mystery. And here's what it looks like. So it's actually city of Colorado Springs land. That's Pikes Peak in the distance. There's actually Colorado Springs over that hill. So if you were able to just go over that hill and then it kind of comes down before the mountain in the distance, you would see the sprawl of Colorado Springs. We're actually standing for this picture right at the city dump, looking back towards the west. So we are greeted with seagulls and plastic bags constantly out there. But this sort of pile of unassuming rocks here has the right age of the right age to make sort of they should have the right fossils in them. And yet people had actually been coming to this area for more than 100 years. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Tyler to pick up the story.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so it was really quite simple, this idea that Ian and I had. I mean, all we needed to do was go and find the fossils from this critical interval of time. But like Ian said, it was also very naive because many scientists have gone to places like this to try to find the fossils from this critical interval. It's the first million years after Earth's last mass extinction. And it's so important because it's the origin of the modern world. We can trace our own origins back, the primates, that is, to right after this mass extinction. So we set out, and we started at, a number of different places. And Ian was showing us, giving me a tour when I started at the museum of all the different places that had these rocks exposed. Again, the rocks of the right age from the first 1 million years after that mass extinction. And folks have been looking for fossils out here at Corral Bluffs for right around 100 years. So this is just a picture from a Smithsonian expedition that happened in the 1920s and 30s. And they noted that there were dinosaur bones at the base of the bluffs, at Corral Bluffs, and then mammals higher up on the bluffs. And they knew there was some sort of an extinction going on somewhere on the bluffs, but the fossils just weren't that great. And the area isn't that big. I mean, the area is, 20 kilometers-ish, and only a small fraction of that has actual outcrop. And here's just an example of some of the fossils that we found when we were out there. And this is actually a remarkable discovery. It's right, that's my hand, so really small. These are a couple of mammal jaws. You can see the teeth poking up. Ian had mentioned I grew up in North Dakota. collecting dinosaurs and, and also looking for fossils after the mass extinction. And I can count on one hand how many mammal jaws I found with 25 years of looking. And here we found 2 mammal jaws. So you're thinking, gee whiz, that's it. That's a great find, right? Well, there is more. So, we were walking around thinking, like, God, there just has to be fossils here. And one of the clues that we had that this area, Corral Bluffs, might be the place where we'd find these fossils was because of this particular fossil here. And this is a palate of a mammal. You can see the teeth here and the teeth over here. This is a really complete, it's only partial, but it's a really complete fossil. It's one of the more complete fossils that I'd ever seen. So Ian and I are out there looking for fossils, not finding a whole lot. But, we had this in the back of our brains. There's like, well, there was one good fossil found here. There's got to be more. And I was walking around thinking about some of my fossil finding experiences in South Africa, because that's another place where I do a lot of field work. And there they look for fossils not by looking for bone, but by actually sort of honing in on a certain type of rock or a concretion. So here is a concretion that I found in South Africa with part of an early mammal skull sticking out. So I thought, maybe the fossils are inside of the concretions or inside of these rocks. We might as well give it a shot, right? We're not finding anything else. So I picked up a concretion and I just whacked it with my rock hammer. And it was just one of the most remarkable moments of my life, because there, it's hard to see with this picture, but I cut through the skull of a mammal. And in that exact moment, I was holding the most complete mammal skull I had ever seen from this interval of time. I mean, truly an incredible moment. You might be able to see a tooth down here and down here. I'll show some better images here shortly, but it was so remarkable, just the way it happened. It cracked open the rock, call Ian over and a volunteer who was with us. We start, high-fiving and celebrating, and, we'd found the fossil, right? We'd found the, cool fossil. And, I sit down and start taking care of the fossil that I had just broken. And Ian and Sharon, this volunteer of ours, they go out. They now know what to look for, right? They know that the fossils are not going to look like what I have down here, but they're going to be inside of these rocks, right? So here's a fossil of a mammal, what it looked like when we found it, and then here was what was inside of that. The fossils were inside of these concretions. So within a matter of about 30 minutes, Ian comes carrying over a mammal skull. Sharon comes over and she's carrying a mammal skull. Within about a half an hour, we'd more than doubled the number of skulls known from this interval of time. So it was just truly, truly remarkable. So the fossils are found inside of these concretions. Now, a concretion is just a type of rock that forms around an organic nucleus. And so here's a concretion, and that organic nucleus could be a mammal skull, if you're really, really lucky, or it might just be bacteria. But it was a complete game changer in our ability to find fossils from this critical interval of time, because we looked across the landscape, and we could see these concretions just all over the landscape. And so we just ran around like little kids, just picking up one skull after another. And then the challenge was, so now we have all these amazing fossils inside of these concretions. Can we clean them, right? Can we extract the fossils from their concretionary tomb? And that was the next challenge that we had. And we hired some of the best preparators around the U.S. I still do is send them out these concretions, and then they send back these beautiful fossils. And so just, again, one by one, one concretion after another. And you can see why folks have been going to this area for over 100 years, including our own museum, which have been going there for about 50 years, and not finding a lot of fossils, because this is what they looked like. They just look like kind of inconspicuous rocks. But inside of these rocks are just the most remarkable, and what's remarkable is how complete they are. We just have never had fossils this complete from this interval of time. So we went from having mere fragments, jaws, broken bits of turtle shell, an isolated, tooth or osteoderm from a crocodile to now having complete mammal skulls, complete crocodiles, turtles, the whole ecosystem trapped inside of these concretions. And so now my office is covered in concretions because we continue to bring these concretions home. You can see we're still going out. You can tell this is field work in the age of COVID, right? So we're still going out there. I was out there last week. We're still finding amazing things. This is a crocodile skeleton. So you can maybe see the skull down here, then the body, and then the tail going down here. So a whole crocodile skeleton encased in the concretionary tomb. And we've been able to prepare a lot of these fossils. This is just a small subset of the fossils. And we have new species of mammals, new species of turtles, new species of crocodile. Here's one example. Here's one new species. This is a new species of soft-shell turtle. So here's the top shell, here's the bottom shell, and here's what we think it may have looked like. And this is an animal that Ian and I just named, a paper that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Here's another specimen, really one of my favorite types of turtle. This is an animal called Paleobotany, which I think kind of looks like a little Darth Vader, the little rounded skull. But this is a new species of turtle, and another paper that Ian and I just published maybe a week or two ago. And if it's not new to science, if it's not a new species, what we have is the most complete specimen of a known species. So this is just one example. This is an animal called Teniolabus, and I have a cast of the skull right here. But this was known from only mere fragments. And now, since this discovery, we now have whole skulls as well as complete jaws. And not only that, we have the plants. And I'll hand it back over to Ian.
Thank you. So we had this amazing discovery of all these mammals, among other things. And so we had part of the ecosystem, and we wanted to build that picture around it, really flesh out the ecosystem, if you will, to say something about how life recovered after the extinction of the dinosaurs. And it turns out these rocks have a great record of fossil plants as well. So our team is actually, I don't know, we're up to probably like 30 scientists or something now, and there's a segment of us, I'm one of them, who are the plant people. So I'm a paleobotanist by training, and I study the sort of plant record through this. We also have people who are fossil pollen experts. They're called paleontologists, and they study the fossil pollen. So on the right-hand side, you can see, nope, that's the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, you can see fossil imprints of leaves and that kind of thing, those sort of fish tail-looking fossils. Those are bits of palm and that kind of thing. And the leaves really give you a sense of the forest above that spot in the ground. So imagine mining into the hill, you're pulling out rocks, you're splitting them open, you're seeing the ancient forest above your head. And you get a sense of the diversity and what lived in a particular area on the landscape. But they're sort of patchy they're not preserved everywhere. So you kind of move through time finding those. But the pollen is everywhere. So you can take any little sort of thimble-sized chunk of rock, dissolve it in hydrofluoric acid, and centrifuge out what's left, and you can get the fossil pollen from that period of time. And it's just like today, right? We're outside sneezing because of rabbit brush and that kind of thing. It's in the air everywhere. So if you took a little sample of river mud, you would get the forest of Salida if you took a little bit of river mud from outside the building here. And so that's what the palynologists do. So on the right-hand side, you see pollen that has been strained, and then it gets stained red, so you can see it in the slide. But those are pollen grains from the Cretaceous. You see lots of different kinds down there. There's little Ks by them. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see here if I can do this with there we go. So the little Ks here, these are types of pollen that belong to trees that lived only in the Cretaceous. There's some other things here. That's a bit of a leaf, cuticle of a leaf, that kind of thing. But all these different pollen grains. We have the extinction event. And what we find afterwards is almost pure ferns ferns come back and proliferate everywhere. And this is common after forest fires and volcanic eruptions in particular. And we think it was a global phenomenon after the asteroid. We call this the fern spike. So everywhere above the boundary, we find almost only ferns. And then the new world comes back. So this is the world afterwards with all kinds of different things. There should be little P's by those, but they're gone for some reason. Anyway, they're different shapes, different grains than down here, right? And so the paleontologists can figure out the regional forest from any little chunk of rock. So that gives us a perspective of everything from the diversity of the forest, but they also give us a window into the climate. And Tyler will talk a little bit about that later in the talk. But they give us a sense of the climate. And you know this from the plants that live outside today. They're tuned to their local climate. So we were preparing all these fossils. So this is just a really fun, yet again, another mechanical preparation of a beautiful little mammal skull. But that's only part of the story. So here's Tyler at the Wheat Ridge Animal Hospital at like midnight on a Friday with the tech there, and he's CT scanning these skulls in the CT scanner. So this is what your dog might go through if they're feeling bad, and then they come out. But we use the same thing with the fossils, and this lets us peer inside these things. So this sort of drab fossil. This is not the one I showed you before, but a different fossil. It's grayed out here. That's what it was on the surface. And what's in teal and purple here are the brain and inner ears of this animal. And that's preserved inside. We never had this kind of perspective before because it was all mechanical preparation to look at the surface. So I'm going to pull away the gray area, pull away the skull, and we'll just look at the brain. And here's the brain itself, and that funny vertical slices there, that's the X-ray machine. Because CT just lines up thousands of X-rays, and then you stack them together. And we do all this in a computer space. We have a lab at the museum that does this kind of work. And we've developed a number of proxies to say something about these critters from not only their inner ears, so again, here are the ears, the semicircular canals, but also something about their brain. So given the size of the brain, we call this the encephalization quotient, we can tell that this animal is not particularly intelligent. Of course, it's not having to run from raptors and T-Rex, right? It's after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Did not have much in the way of an agility score. We can learn that from its inner ears. Slow-moving, lumbering creature, probably nothing chasing it or on the landscape. But it had incredible amount of its brain dedicated to its sense of smell. So that's this part of the brain up here. So it probably had this incredible sense of smell. So these early animals, you can start to build a picture of these things rummaging around on a forest, not worrying about running from anything, not terribly intelligent, just following their nose wherever they go. So this is sort of some of the cool discoveries that are happening now, and we actually have a paper in review with a team out of the UK on just this work, looking at early placental mammal brains through this time period. But the discoveries go well beyond that. So Tyler was quite interested to see if the plants could say something about why these animals were changing over time. We're going to go through a little sequence soon about how these animals were changing over time. And there was a big jump in the record at one point, and he was pushing us, the plant people, to say something about that. What was happening with the forests? And so one of the things we keyed in on was, could there be a new food source on the landscape? And we kind of knew that the fossil beans or legumes should be around at this moment, but none had been found this old. The oldest had been found about 4 million years younger in South America, but the evidence from looking at the family trees pointed to this moment. And so we were digging, and we were actually filming. There was a film crew with us through most of this discovery. And this young student, she was 14 at the time, Aeon Way Smith, was listening keenly to this conversation. And literally, I was doing an interview on camera, and she kept tapping me on the shoulder. And I finally looked around, and she was holding the world's oldest fossil bean. And she literally found it on camera. Of course, the cameras just went straight to her. And if you watch the show about this, she's just beaming at this moment. It's really incredible. But it sort of helped tell this story. There's a brand new food source in the landscape for these new mammals. And Aeon found the oldest legume. Legumes are the third most speciose group of plants on the planet today. More than 20,000 species of them. We think of them as green beans and things like, I'm sure we all ate legumes for dinner tonight. But here's a bean pod and a couple of little tiny leaflets. But they're second only to grains in terms of importance of food source to us from the plant world. And they're incredibly important to animals around the planet. And the first ones, as far as we know, are right here in Colorado. And this young student, Aeon, found it literally on camera. And so here's our reconstruction of this beautiful early legume in Colorado. And so it's being written up right now. One of our postdocs is just finishing it up. So the discoveries went well beyond the vertebrates and extended to the plants as well. So before I hand it back to Tyler to sort of sum up this story, I really want to drive home this point of how special this was. And we came to start calling this the trifecta of paleontology. So if you were to go to any period of time in the rock record throughout the long history of life on Earth, and we're able to find not only the vertebrates, but also plants, but then be able to tell time in those rocks, you could spend your career working on that moment, regardless of when it was, right, and how it related to the sort of long span of life on Earth. And in this moment that is so shrouded in mystery, where we didn't have much information about the origins of our own world, we found all three of these things. Not only did we have the plants, the incredible plants, to go along with these amazing vertebrate skulls. Usually the chemistry of the preservation of one or the other prohibits the other from being preserved. Both were there. We were actually also able to precisely tell time from the rocks, which is no easy feat. You need the right kinds of rocks to date to tell time. So we had the clock, and we had the animals, and we had the plants to sort of put this story together. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler to take it all the way home.
All right, so when I started, I said all we had to do was find the fossils, right? We knew there was going to be a cool story. Many scientists have been trying to find fossils from this interval of time, but all we had to do was find them. So now we found the fossils. So what does it say? What does it tell us? Well, this is what we knew before, right? We knew that 66 million years ago, a giant asteroid struck Earth, wiped out the dinosaurs, and then we didn't really know a whole lot. There was quite a gap in our fossil record. We just didn't have good fossils. So now we have the fossils. One of the first things that we needed to do was figure out the age of all of our fossils, that third part of that trifecta. That was the work, Ian and I get to come and give all these talks, but there were 16 scientists as part of this particular project. And this was the work of Ken Weissenberger, who really was able to tie together all of our fossil localities. And then we needed to figure out the age of the fossils, and that was the work of Anthony Fontes. We looked at the paleomagnetism of the rocks. And I won't go into that, but suffice to say that we learned from their work that we had the first 1 million years after the mass extinction. So the extinction was just over 66 million years ago. I put this at 0 because this really is the biologic reset button. And so we go from 0 to 1 million years. And then we have all these amazing vertebrate fossils, right? We have all these skulls. And what can you do with the skulls? You can do a lot of things, right? Ian was talking about looking at the size of their brains and their inner ears to figure out where they were living and how smart they were. But one of the easiest things you can do when you have skulls versus just fragments of teeth is look at body size. And body size is so important in the ecology of all animals, of where they live, of what they're eating. And so that was the first thing we did, was just look at the body size and how did that body size change through time. So here you can see, the largest animal down here is mammal is about 12 pounds. And then the largest mammal to survive the mass extinction is about 1 pound or so. And then you can see there's a couple of distinct jumps in body size at 300,000 years and at 700,000 years. And so that's where I was pushing Ian and his team of paleobotanists to tell me what was going on with the plants. These animals aren't evolving in isolation. There's got to be something going on with the ecology. And so he and his team got to work, collected a lot of plant fossils and counted a lot of pollen grains. And from the pollen, we were able to figure out that there was a distinct spike in ferns. So down here is just a percent of the number of grains, or, there's a lot of ferns right here. And so this is what we call the fern world. So when you look at a pollen slide, it would be covered in fern spores. And then we were able to learn from the pollen as well that there was a moment in time for about 300,000 years where the world's, where this area seemed to be dominated by palms. So we've dubbed this the palm world. And we saw that not only from the pollen, so here's what we see looking underneath the microscope, but we also continue to find lots of in situ palm tree trunks. Here's a big palm frond, here's palm flowers. So it was a world for about 300,000 years that was dominated by palms. And then also looking at the pollen, we were able to see that the forests were really starting to come back. And one of the main groups of plants that was coming back was the walnut family. There was a diversification of the walnut family. And so we dubbed this the pecan pie world because pecan and walnut. And it's at that exact interval that you start getting some chunkier mammals out on the landscape. So new food appearing on the landscape, mammals getting bigger. And then likewise, the last bit we see here is the appearance of the legume, Aeon's legume. And that corresponds, again, with this jump in body size here. So legumes are, of course, loaded with protein. And so we dub this the protein bar world. And so, I'm not going to go into this too much, but the leaves also tell us a lot about the temperature. So if you can go out onto the landscape today and count the number of species of plants that have toothed margins on their leaves versus smooth margins, that correlates really well with temperature in modern ecosystems. So it's a very powerful tool for inferring, ancient temperature. And so Ian and the team looked at that, and we noticed there were 3 warming intervals, and those warming intervals correspond with the jump, with the changes in the worlds as well, going from the palm world to the pecan pie world. We have a warming interval. We have new plants. The warming interval we think is impacting the evolution of the forests, which in turn is impacting the ecology and evolution of these mammals. So we see these 3 distinct warming intervals. So we sort of had it all, right? We had time, temperature, plants, and animals. So now we can really tie it all together with a series of really amazing pieces of artwork by Andrei Atuchin, one of our paleo artists who, up until recently, lived in Siberia. But these reconstructions are incredibly accurate. So much time and energy goes into each of these reconstructions. So every single plant and animal has been found, that builds these reconstructions. So what can we say? This is what the world looked like 66 million years ago, right before the asteroid struck. And then, of course, you had the giant asteroid struck. That's the single worst day for multicellular life on Earth. The single worst day. Pretty crazy. A pretty bad day to be around. 75% of animals and plants go extinct, but as we all know, we're standing here today, some things survived. And this is what the world here in Colorado would have looked like, right after the mass extinction, for tens to hundreds to maybe thousands of years after the mass extinction. You'd have, of course, the Rockies in the background. Here is the largest mammal that survived the mass extinction. So that's about 0.5 kilogram, so it's about the size of a subway, a rat. And then this is the largest animal that survived the mass extinction. This is a big turtle, turtle called Exostomes. And these animals were living in these fern-dominated forests with, a really patchy forests, kind of in here and there. These patchy forests made up of angiosperms as well as lots of palms. And then for about 300,000 years, you had a world, at least here in the Front Range, that was dominated by palms, this palm-dominated forest. And in this palm-dominated forest, the forests were starting to come back a little bit. The mammals were really starting to bounce back in terms of diversity, and as well as size. You have an animal here that's about the size of a raccoon. This is the same size as mammals that lived alongside the dinosaurs. So it took about 300,000 years for mammals to regain, that size, that body mass. And then right at 300,000 years, in that warming interval, we have, a big change in the forest ecology. The forests are really starting to come back. One of the things that really bounces back is the walnut family, the pecan pie moment. And in that exact moment, we get these mammals that are much, much bigger than anything that lived during the age of the dinosaurs. These animals are 35 times larger than the animals that survived the mass extinction at 300,000 years after the mass extinction. And then the last interval of time is the protein bar world, and this is 700,000 years after the mass extinction. And here the forests are, starting to really bounce back. You get these new food sources on the landscape, these caloric-rich food source that we think some of these mammals were eating. And at that same interval of time, we have mammals now, these two here, and I have cast down on the table here. These animals are 100 times bigger than the animals that survived the mass extinction. So 100 times bigger in 700,000 years. We won't see a comparable jump in body size for another 35 million years. So it all, I think, really speaks to the resilience of life and to, just how quickly life bounced back after, again, the single worst day for life on Earth. So pretty remarkable, pretty fast, but pretty slow, obviously, in human time. So, we were really lucky that we published this discovery in one of the premier scientific journals. We worked with filmmakers at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute to put together this documentary. So if you haven't watched it, I think you can still stream it online at pbs.org. And then we worked with folks at our own museum to put together this remarkable exhibit that displays some of the best fossils that we found from this critical interval of time. And it was just really, truly an amazing experience, I think, for both Ian and myself, particularly being able to do this NOVA documentary. And with that, I just want to play sort of the highlight reel from this documentary. It's a really bad time for life on Earth.
I mean, you could go your entire career and not find a skull from this time period. That's how rare they are.
They're excruciatingly hard to find.
There's just nothing like picking up something and finding out it's something amazing.
It was crazy the way it happened.
Bam! We hit it big. I just found a mammal skull.
It was like opening a door into a new world.
We want to build up a picture of how life evolved in this period.
Some things survive, right? Including some of our earliest ancestors.
Over the last 66 million years, mammals evolved an incredible diversity of forms.
That moment of rapid mammal evolution is effectively the trigger to our existence here on planet Earth.
Thank you.
critical about climate is that it is always changing, right? There's these broad cycles in Earth's history in which climate, it's really reservoirs of carbon move from the sediments at the bottom of the ocean and trapped in mountains and stuff and get into the atmosphere and warm the planet over millions of years, and it cools. Actually, building of mountains cools the planet, so the building of the Himalaya has cooled the planet that we live in today. Just the erosion of those mountains soaks up CO2, essentially, out of the fresh water. Anyway, there's a whole chemical process behind it. But those changing climates do affect the evolution of plants and animals because it sort of moves their sort of habitable zones around the planet. So they're moving, they're migrating, they're interacting with one another, and they need to adapt and sort of compete in the sort of environmental space in which they live. And that puts selective pressure on them, which is one of the important parts of the evolutionary process. Of course, today, we're in sort of a runaway system, right? We are probably our climate is changing more than 100 times as fast as it ever did in these moments. And it's just because we're playing the game of geology, right? We're taking the carbon that's in these different reservoirs and we're moving it around, right? And it has an effect on the world's climate. So we've, of course, got a little bit of a TBD moment right now, but it certainly has had a big impact in the past.
I'm reminded of Jurassic Park, and they had the line about life finds a way.
Thank you again for being here. Are there other areas on the planet that you could imagine you would find some of the same evidence and kind of corroborate this find?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is it's got to be yes, but we just haven't found it yet. You know, Mother Nature tends to repeat herself, so it would be remarkable to have this be the only spot on the globe where we get this type of preservation, because I think that's the real key, is to have these fossils preserved in these concretions. And yeah, we've looked in other areas. I've looked in my hometown area in the Dakotas and Montana to see if there's a similar type of preservation. There is not. I've looked elsewhere, but it's only a matter of time before I think somebody else finds this same type of preservation, probably from this, you know, could be from this same interval of time as well.
Any other?
Well, my question was pretty similar. I was just wondering if scientists around the world were breaking up these rocks. But I guess you kind of answered that not yet.
Yeah, I mean, and I should also say on top of that this type of preservation, these fossils inside of concretions is really common in the invertebrate world. So if you go look for ammonites or, you know, other creatures, you know, the pure shale or anything that lives in the ocean, you usually find them in these concretions. This type of preservation is just really abnormal in a terrestrial environment, in a land-bearing environment. It's kind of unheard of. And so I've had some colleagues who reach out, some colleagues in Morocco, and they think they found a similar type of deposit. So it's only, again, I think it's only a matter of time before more of these come to light in a terrestrial environment, because this type of preservation is the norm for marine environments.
As you described the plants changing from ferns to palm to walnut to the legumes, it seems awfully fast. Is that your impression? And what makes that how is there such a significant change?
Yeah, a great observation and great point. It is fast, and we think that that changing climate really drove immigration, right? Drove things that probably, if we had the fossils, we could find in more southern latitudes at that time. So these aren't probably the first legumes on the landscape, right? They were probably further south. They may have evolved in the tropics and may have been around for a couple of million years beforehand, but that warming interval that we sort of observed for it gave them the sort of ability to move northward. Their climatic sort of zone expanded. And then we saw the animals moving in. But it's always really hard to tease out just your question. Are the things evolving in place, or are they moving into an area? And the only way to do that is to have more sites around the planet to sort of to tease that very question out.
Are there characteristics of rocks that make you believe that they have fossils in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need to have a sedimentary rock to start with. That's the only place where you'll find fossils. But yeah, we spend a lot of time looking at geologic maps to figure out, where we can go in the world to answer the questions that we're interested in. And so Ian and I, that's what we did when we first started on this particular journey, was looking at maps from around the world that had terrestrial, Cretaceous and Paleogene boundaries, or and land-based ones, and you go to these sedimentary basins, and then it just takes a little bit of luck. So it's that, and then also just pouring through the literature, because at this point, most parts of the globe have been explored a little bit in terms of looking for fossils. So even here, this particular area, folks were looking there in the 1900s. So. But yeah, a lot of looking at maps and figuring out where the correct sedimentary basins are.
Thank you for presenting this wonderful program to us. We're all grateful. Question: you're using CT scans to evaluate a bunch of things. For field work, I wonder if the portable ultrasound units, like the physicians use, would be of any benefit to you.
Yeah, I don't think so, because the CT scanners that we use are so incredibly powerful, because we're trying to pick out slight changes in density. The density is so similar between the concretionary mass and the bone itself. You have to hit these things with a lot of power, and so I think that would be a challenge. I think for using medical technology, it hasn't been that useful. We have to send a lot of these fossils to facilities that only look at minerals or iron, so we spend a lot of time working with Lockheed Martin, where they CT scan space shuttle parts, before launching. So interestingly enough, we've had other folks ask that same question, and I haven't tried it, but I think we would. I don't think it'd be successful, just because the density between the bone and the rock is so similar. But it might be worth trying. Maybe we should give it a shot.
Do you find any insects?
Oh man, insects. Yeah, so it's interesting. There's some things that we don't find, and insects are one of them. But we do find evidence of insects on the leaves. So, a lot of insects eat the leaves, and there's a whole science behind that. And one of our postdocs at the museum, Gussie McCracken, that's what she studies, is looking at leaf damage. And you can learn a lot about what types of insects were on the landscape by looking at the damage to the leaves.
But no cockroaches?
No cockroaches yet. They were there, though. They've always been there.
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit about the KT boundary, the minerals, how it was determined that was the moment of impact? And is that planet, is it over the entire planet?
Yeah, so the minerals that folks look for. Yeah, so this is an idea that was put forth in the early 1980s. A group out of Berkeley, and they looked, they were doing a different study, but they knew there was an extinction interval here, and so they looked at rare earth minerals, and they looked at iridium. And they were shocked when they saw an iridium spike right across the boundary. And they found that worldwide. They found that in Italy, they found it in Montana, they found it in other places. And so they're the ones that published this idea that it was an asteroid that struck Earth. And it was met with widespread skepticism, particularly among the paleontologists, who just said it was a bitter battle in the 1980s and even in the 1990s. But at this point, we found that iridium spike worldwide. We can also look at there's certain minerals that become shocked because they're formed under intense heat and pressure. So they only form at atomic blast sites. testing facilities, or when asteroids hit the Earth. And so these are called shock minerals. So you can look at these minerals underneath the scanning electron microscope, and it's the deformation, the heat and whatnot, change the sort of the structure of the crystals. And so it kind of looks like a cat got a hold of the mineral, because there's little scratch marks all over it. So those are two of the primary things, but there's a number of other things that people look at as well. Oh yeah. I mean, the evidence that there was an asteroid. Of course, in the 90s, in the 80s, people were like, "Well, there was an asteroid. Like, where's the crater?" Then, in I think 1999, they found the crater. So I mean, there's a lot of evidence, worldwide that it was an asteroid that struck Earth, and so. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to sign up as a tour. So with the Coral Bluffs Alliance, COBA, I think they have a website, right? If you Google Coral Bluffs, it'll show up, and then you can go, but you just have to sign up. And there's a number of amazing tour guides that use a lot of the artwork that we've put together, and are able to tell this story. And it's great to be able, they have certain casts of fossils, and you can see just lots and lots of wood fossils on the landscape as well. It's pretty remarkable. I would highly recommend going. Unbiased opinion.
You should be glad I'm here to ask dumb questions. So sadly for me, when I look at rocks, they just look like rocks to me. I was lucky enough to date a geologist at one time, and he was able to pick up rocks that were geodes. So you split them open, they're pretty crystals. So yes, thank you. Talk to me about the difference between, I can't even say the word. Okay, concretion. Okay, well that's it. I'm from Texas. We don't talk like that. Talk to us about the time period of geodes and this.
Yeah, so great. So they're just two different processes of sort of a growth of rock around a sort of central nucleus. Geodes actually grow in, and so they're a cavity, and there's crystals growing on the inside. And I actually don't know why they're hollow. They occur in volcanic provinces. So they're ancient volcanic sediments typically, and lots of water and other fluids are moving through the rock, and the crystals precipitate inside the cavities of these sort of round rocks. And then if you have the eye for the geode, you can just go across the ground and be like, that's a geode, and you pick it up and boom, it's incredible. And it's the same kind of thing, and I don't think Tyler and I could walk out and find geodes because we're just not trained in geode looking, but it's the same kind of idea, right? So once we knew the search image for these things, we saw them everywhere. These sort of grow out, right? So there's an organic nucleus, and then that skull is buried in sediment and mud or sand, and then minerals conglomerate on the outside, sort of like it looks like it's been rolled in cake dough or something like that. And it can be a skull, it can be a little chunk of wood, it could be a piece of bone, it could even be like a little bacterial mass that gets these things started. So when you look across, if you ever visit Coral Bluffs, you'll look across the landscape and see millions of these concretions. Only 1 in 300 or 400 has a fossil in it. The rest are probably just some sort of bacterial or plant nucleus that got the mineral forming process to form. But think of it as sort of like a pearl and an oyster, that kind of thing. Might be a nice way to think about it.
All right. I'm not seeing any more hands up, so thank you all for the great questions. And if you guys would just hold tight for a second. Okay, there's that. Do you want to just sit that down? Yeah, and here's the mic. Okay. You want me to? I'll stand behind you.
Okay. So we like to thank our speakers with speaker gifts. And I'm going to start with Tyler because it's your first time.
Indeed.
And So our speaker gift is a amazonite crystal.
Beautiful.
It's a microcline that has iron in it. Anyway, it's if you get tired of looking at fossils, if you went around the Pikes Peak region and looked for pegmatite, you could find some amazonite there.
It's beautiful. Yep. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Ian, this is not your first time. You already have an amazonite, and so we didn't want to give you the same thing again. But recognizing that you're going to be probably traveling the world with National Geographic, we'd really like you to wear something from the local area. And so this is a Melanzana hoodie.
Oh, thank you. That is awesome. Wow. Thank you both so much.
Made in Leadville.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for taking the time to come down here and talk to us and to the kids in the schools. I know they're going to be excited. I'm going to see them out along the bluffs around here looking for concretions.
Yep. I hope so.
All right, thank you all for coming. We appreciate everybody turning out. Wonderful. Everybody be safe getting home. Good night.